Good morning, Rabbi Shai. Welcome to Pesachim, Daf 74, Ad. So we're starting, we're about to be in Purim time, so Ad reminds us, Ad Lo Yada, that soon we will be celebrating Ad Lo Yada until we don't know the difference between Baruch Mordechai and Aruch Haman. So welcome to everybody who came into the building and through the weather. Welcome to everybody who braved the storm and got all the way to your couch and are connected to us on Zoom. So welcome to everybody. We're starting off with the sponsorships. For Wednesday, we have a Talmud Torah sponsorship by the Elbaum family for the recent yahrzeit and in memory of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kifel ben Avraham Menachem Zal, loving father of Avron, Shan, and Judah Elbaum, and loving husband of Shirley Elbaum. May his memory be a blessing and remain eternal in our hearts. And by Bracha Strimber, in loving memory of Avi Strimber, Avraham ben Kalman Eliezer Levi Zal, and his 9th yahrzeit. We also have a Week of Learning sponsor by Gail and Dov Stenger in honor of their grandson, Atil Mordechai Weinberg, will become a bar mitzvah, Parshas Yisro, and be called to Torah on Shvat 23 in morning minyan. Hey, that's coming right up. So in this unprecedented time, family members can share in his Simcha, Mazel Tov, and by Moshe and Devorah Wordesheim for Refuah Shlema, for Yara Gittel Bas Shai Etel. Thank you for all our sponsors for making this daf possible, and thank you for the Ribbanu Shalom for having us start a new parak today. It's a tremendous treat, tremendous and delicious treat to start Pesach Solin. How do we roast it? And I'm already craving the barbecue just thinking about that. And so we're starting at the top of 74, Daf Ad Lo Yada. It's interesting, the Chizkuni says, on the Torah that every aspect of the Pesach in Mitzrayim was a shtoch to the Avodah Zarah, was a what we call in your face today. That's the lashon the kids use. Is because what did we do in Mitzrayim is the Jews were told to take the gedi, to drag it through the streets. And the gedi was actually worshipped by the Egyptians. There are actually some ancient sources who said the Egyptians were vegetarians, they were militant vegans, and just like in India, if you hurt a cow, then the people would, at least in the past, they'd beat the person up or cause them serious harm for hurting animals because they thought the animals were reincarnated souls, whatever it is. So in Mitzrayim, they used to pray to sheep, at least to sheep. And so to drag a sheep through the street, the Egyptian would be saying, well, that's my God. You would wait, I got to pray to it first. But the Jews were taking it right in front of them. And not only that, the Jews tied it to their bed for 4 days. And you can imagine the noise the sheep were making. And the Egyptians are powerless when the Jews have got their idols, their gods tied to the bed, and they're bleeding. And they're like, help, help. And the Egyptians can't do anything. And not only that, is we're instructed to do this in the afternoon. In front of everybody, we're going to take the sheep out. We're going to slaughter them publicly. And we're going to start a barbecue. We're going to do tzli. We're going to do a barbecue. Now we know, Rabbi Sai, when the neighbors make a barbecue, you smell it. It's beautiful. Oh, delicious barbecue. So we know that the whole Mitzrayim could smell the Jews roasting the Gilulim, the idols, the gods of Mitzrayim, in front of them, and they were powerless to stop it. And around that time, that's when the Egyptians had a civil war. The Bechorim said, enough is enough. The firstborn Egyptians rebelled against the other Egyptians. So we have Shabbat HaGadol. Shabbat HaGadol is not just for the long drasha, but it's because it was a great Shabbos that Hashem protected us from the Egyptians trying to kill us, even though we had taken their gods in front of their eyes, and it was a real in-your-face to them, as they say. That's what the Chizkuni says, so that's one of the reasons the Torah commands us to roast it, is because that's what we did in Mitzrayim, and also it has that communal kind of sense to it. Like, oh, we're making barbecue, we're getting together, we're making a roast, we're making a barbecue, everyone smells it, everyone gets together, and part of the whole inyan of Karban Pesach is the Am Yisrael gets together with Achdus, we're Ole Regel, we get together in groups, we have our group, we have our Chaverim, and we have a roast together. So Ketzad Solin, how do we roast the Karban Pesach, Et HaPesach? Mevi'in Shipud, we bring a spit shel rimon from a pomegranate tree. V'tochvo l'toch piv, we put it into the mouth of the animal, ad beis nekuvosav, until the opening. V'noisen es karev es bnei ma'av l'tocho, and we put the legs, which we had cut off, and the kishkas, which we had removed and washed out, back inside the cavity of the animal. Divrei Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. That's according to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. So there's an interesting point there, is we have the legs there also. Now the Rambam writes explicitly that we leave something in the legs. Who knows what's not kosher in the legs of an animal? Wow, multiple answers. Gid hanasha. Rambam says, when you get to the gid hanasha in your Karban Pesach, you eat around it. But you leave it in. You leave the gid hanasha in your Karban Pesach, and you roast it, and you eat it. Now remember, this is going back about 2 years already. when we learned chulin, there's a whole parak, there's a whole chapter in Shas about gid hanashe. Gid hanashe is not kosher, it's also deraisa. Now there's a machlokes, if the gid is no ten tam, if it has its own taste, that taste can go out into the rest of the food. There's a machlokes if it has its own taste, or it's like wood, it's like eitz ba'alma, it doesn't give out a taste. But even if it doesn't, the shumana gid, the fatty sheath around the gid, that does have a taste, and that would be an issue. So the Rambam says you just eat around the gid hanashe, you leave it in. The Ravid gets very. He gets the Eishel Torah. He gets very fiery about the Rambam. He says, that's not kosher. It's also the rice. It's simply not kosher. He says, in fact, if I was Zoche to be eating a Korban Pesach, and they brought me a Korban Pesach like the Rambam, I would throw it on the floor. Not kosher. So it's an amazing thing. So if the Rambam and the Ravid were eating a Korban Pesach together, it would certainly be interesting and heated. It would be heated in more ways than just the tzli. We'll put it that way. So that's an amazing note from the Rishonim about the Gid Hanashe being in this Korban Pesach. So Rabbi Yossi Galili says you put the legs and the kishkas back in the cavity of the animal, you roast them all together. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Kamin Bishul Huzay. Now that's kind of like cooking. You understand what's going on with Bishul is usually refers to cooking in a pot. So you put your food in your pot with some water, some liquid, and you're heating up the pot, and that heat from the pot transfers to the liquid medium into the food. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, if you're putting the kishkas back inside the cavity, now the rest of the animal, the outer part of the animal with the bones and everything, that's kind of acting like a pot that we're heating up from the sleeve, from the barbecue, and that's causing a bishul kind of activity to go inside for the kishkas and the legs, and you don't want it to be bishul. In fact, the Torah tells us you have to eat it sliesh, and then it tells us you don't eat it na mevushal, you don't eat it cooked with bishul, with a liquid medium in a pot, and you don't eat it raw. See, it's davka sliesh. So he says that's not a good idea. What do? Ela, rather, tolin chutzalo. You hang them on the shvud, you put them on the stick outside, on top of the, we're going to see they put the legs and the kishkas on top. That was the other option. The Mishnah goes on, Ein solin es Pesach lo shafud, not on a stick. This refers to a metal stick. Rashi says a barzel, it's copper, some sort of metal. We're going to see why in the Gemara pretty soon. V'lo ala askala. We also don't do it on a metal grill. We don't do it on a grill. It has to be davka on the stick. Amar Tzadok brings, there was a Maisa, a true story, by Rabban Gamliel, She'amar LaTavi Avdo. He said to Tavi, his slave. Now Tavi shows up in a few places. In Brachas, he shows up that he was kosher, and Rabban Gamliel accepted consolation as a mourner when he passed away. He shows up in Sukkos, that he slept under the table. So he was a Talmud Chacham, but also in Evid. He and Rabban Gamliel tell him on Pesach time, say v'tzolil lanu es a Pesach ala askula. Go out and grill us the Korban Pesach on a grill, not on a spit. So that's kind of interesting, is he's sort of bucking the trend here. What's more interesting, Rabbosai, is there's two Rabban Gamliels. And the Rabban Gamliel we're referring to here was the Nasi after the Chorban Habayis. I'll let that sink in. The people on Zoom are still waking up here. We're still waking up here. He was the Nasi after Chorban Habayis, and he's saying, go out and roast our Pesach. So, okay, it could be. Some of Farshim say, well, it happened when he was a kid, before the Chorban Habayis. The Netziv says directly, this was after Chorban Habayis. And they still were cooking up a Korban Pesach, they're still bringing a Korban Pesach after the Chorban Habayis. The Netziv says until Beitar happened. He says they still knew the Makam of Mizbeach, they knew where the Mizbeach was. It was possible, there's some sources say the Mizbeach might have still been there. Even after the Chorban Habayis, the building was gone, but the Mizbeach was still there. Or the Netziv says they knew where the Mizbeach was, so they could put the dam there when they brought their Korban Pesach. But they knew the locations. And we understand that Korban Pesach is special because even if Rove of the Tzibur, if most people are Tamei Meis, you still bring the Korban Pesach in Tumah. So even if you understand, Rabbi said, the year after the Chorban Habayis, there's no Beis HaMikdash, everyone's Tamei Meis, they're dead, it's horrible, but they could still bring a Korban Pesach in Tumah. They knew where the Mizbeach was. And the Netziv says specifically, that's what we're referring to, is even after the Chorban, Rabban Gamliel was the first Nasi after the Chorban, and he was instrumental in maintaining Achdus and uniting Klal Yisrael, with Keren B'Yavneh, right? Uniting us around the Sanhedrin, around the Torah, and bringing us consolation, bringing us Achdus, bringing us a lot of dinim of Zecher l'Chorban, that we shake the lulav all 7 days, Zecher l'Bayis, all of these things to remember the Chorban Habayis. And here he's roasting his Korban Pesach, Rabbosai. The Rav Yaakov Emden says in Shailas Yavitz, he says specifically this was after the Chorban Habayis, and they asked him about Pesach B'Zman Hazeh,
And it's an issue. It's an issue. But in theory, if you know where the Mizbeach is supposed to be, you know where to put the dam, then even if you're Tamei Meis, and Kol Sheken, you're not Tamei Meis, but even Tamei Meis, you could bring a carbon Pesach. And the Rambam in Hilchos Beis Bechira, chapter 6, Halacha 15, he says, Makrivin afal pi she'ein sham bais. You can bring the carbon even though there's no Beis HaMikdash. L'maisa, they tried. They tried in 2007. A group got together with a Kohen Miyuchas and some animals. They petitioned the government, the Supreme Court. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of politics, backroom deals. The Supreme Court said, no, we understand you have a religious freedom interest, but there's a chance of a violent response from the Bnei Yishmael, so we don't want to do it. In 2008, they appealed again, and it didn't go through, but there are people out there who want to bring a carbon Pesach, and there are sources, there are reliable sources in the Rishonim and the Rambam that you could bring the carbon Pesach even without a Beis HaMikdash. According to the Netziv, they kept doing this until Beitar. Beitar is when the Bar Kokhba revolt took place. Rabbi Akiva thought he might be Mashiach, we might rebuild the temple, but then the Romans apparently wiped out enough people, Nebuch, or they wiped out the place where the Mizbeach was, so it wasn't recognizable anymore. And it also raises the question, we don't have a Masorah, we don't have a Navi of exactly where the Mizbeach was, but what about relying on archaeology? Archaeology gives us a lot of hints about the outline of the temple complex, and the Mizbeach. Is archaeology reliable when we don't have a Navi? So that's a whole other discussion we're not going to get into here, but this is a very interesting point that Rabban Gamliel was having Tavi roast up their carbon Pesach, and this is the same Rabban Gamliel, according to Mini, who was after the Korban Abayis. So this is an amazing thing. Can you bring the Pesach after the Korban? That is our Mishnah. Good, let's get into the Gemara. Now we're excited. So why don't we bring a spit made of metal? So here's the answer. Because once part of the metal gets hot, all of the metal gets hot. So you understand the bottom of the metal spit, which is in your fire, it's going to get very hot, and then it's going to be hot up on the inside. What's going to happen? Now the inside of the animal, where it's touching the spit, is going to get cooked, not because of the fire, but because of the shvud. The metal gets very hot, and now it's searing the animal from the inside, not just doing tzli from the outside. V'rachmana amar, and the Torah told us, tzli eish, has to be roasted by a fire, v'lo tzli machmat davar acher, not tzli from something else, not seared from contact with a metal stick, but only roasted from a fire davka. So if you put the metal stick inside, then it's going to get all very hot. Metal is a good conductor of heat, and it's going to sear it from the inside. V'neisei shel dekel. So why it had to be remown? It was dafka a pomegranate in the Mishnah. Why don't we bring shel dekel from a palm tree? Aidi de isle shive, so palm branches have grooves, as we know. Mapik maya, so in those grooves, so liquid is going to come out. And again, introducing liquid means it's not as much as tzli, it's more of a bishul. Bishul, that cooking we do in a pot, is with a liquid medium. We don't want liquids involved here. We want it to be dry roasted. V'have kimivushal, and that will be like cooking. V'neisei shel ta'ina, why don't we bring of a fig branch? Aidi de machalchel, so if that's hollow, so mapik maya. So because it's hollow, it's going to ooze out sap, and also introduce mayim, be like mevushal, chabi like a mevushal. Neisi shel alun, why not bring of an oak tree? Apparently that is less sap. V'shel charuf, or a carob. V'shel shikma, or a sycamore. So these are, you can get nice branches out of these with less sap. Aidi de isbe kitre, but they do have knots. V'mapik maya, and so some liquid, some sap will exude from these branches from the place of the knots, and that sap is going to be, understand, in between the shvud, in between the stick and the animal, and it's going to make sort of a mavushal kind of issue, which we don't want. We don't want to introduce liquids into the tzli of our carbon pesach. Shel rimon nami isbe kitre. So a rimon, it also has knots. So okay, shie kitre, but those knots are smoother. So apparently those knots are smooth. I'm not an expert in rimon tree wood, but if you see a pomegranate tree, apparently the knots are smoother. They're less likely to exude sap into what they're in contact with. Ibayis ema benavga bar shota, or it could be a sapling 1 year old of the rimon tree. Delais be kitra. It doesn't have knots yet. So this is an interesting thing that 7 years and 5 months ago, I wrote a big question mark next to this, and then I wrote a note to myself that I would find 7 years, 5 months later on the next cycle of Daf Yomi. And I said, but a rimon is a fruit tree. And we have a mitzvah in the Torah, bal tashchis, that we don't eliminate fruit trees. So apparently we were cutting down fruit trees in order to make the spits for the carbon pesach. And you understand, Rabbosai, we saw the Mishnah, 3 groups, hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of karbanos pesach. That's a lot of rimon trees. That's a lot of rimon trees. So, first of all, investment advice. When we make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, soon, God willing, we should plant a lot of pomegranate trees because there'll be a high demand for pomegranate trees every year around Pesach time. So will be a very good investment. A wise investment will be to plant rimon. And then I answered myself in the notes, and I said, because maybe they're only 1 year old, there's no fruit. So this is a suggestion the Gemara gives. If it's a 1 year old tree, there's no knots yet, so maybe the knots are related to the fruit. Maybe it grows more knots in the wood as it's starting to grow fruit. Maybe a 1 year old sapling of a rimon doesn't have the knots because it doesn't have fruit. If it doesn't have fruit, there's no problem cutting down the fruit tree. Or maybe you say there's less of a problem because only potential to have fruit, not real fruit. It's not a bal tashchis. We don't have to be worried about the curses that some of the Mefarshim say come on people who cut down fruit trees for no reason, because here there's a reason and here there's no fruit yet. So that was my answer from 7 years, 5 months ago in the last Daf Yomi cycle. But we know that now good investment advice in Eretz Yisrael is to plant a lot of pomegranate trees. We will need a lot of them. Good. So Leis Bekitre, good. V'ha'ika be'poske, but the place you cut the branch, the rimon branch, would leak the sap out. The mapik levei poske levar, you put that outside of the animal. So what's going on is you cut off the branch to make your shvod, to make your spit of pomegranate, and the place you cut is outside the animal, so whatever sap leaks out of there during the tzli is not going to become a problem. So invest in pomegranate trees, Rabbosai. Masnisin delok Rabbi Yehuda, but our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Tisanya, there's a brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kashem shepud shel eitz eino nisraf. Just like a spit made of wood doesn't burn up. Kach shepud shel mateches eino martiach. So too, using a spit made of metal is not going to be martiach. It's not going to boil up the animal from inside and make a problem. Amrulo, they say no. They answered Rabbi Yehuda not like that. Ze chamikzaso chamkulo. V'zeh chamikzaso eno chamkulo. But by metal, as we mentioned in the Mishnah, if you heat up a little bit of the metal, you heat up a lot of the metal. The entire metal conducts heat, and it gets very hot. But by wood, you heat up some of the wood. It doesn't necessarily heat up the rest of it. Now, everybody say this is halacha l'maisa. What if you're making chicken soup? You're making a pot of chicken soup, and then someone comes along, and they didn't know better, and they took a milchig spoon, and they stirred the chicken soup. So it's a whole siman in the Shulchan Aruch about what happens when you stirred your chicken soup with a milk spoon, or vice versa. And it depends. Rabbi say, what's your spoon made of? Because we know, again, 2 years ago we learned chulin. We know you have a concept of bittul b'shishim. If you have 60 times the material, then you're mevatel the other taste. It's like the other taste is not recognizable, not discernible, and not halachically relevant. So if you have 60 times more soup than that milchig spoon you dipped into it, Rabbi Sai, then it's mevatel. But how much of the spoon do you need to be mevatel? So here it is. If you have a wooden spoon, then only the part of the spoon that was inside the soup, that's the only thing that had contact with the hot soup. That's the only area of the spoon where the blios, the absorbed tastes of dairy products, could come out. So you only have to be mevatel the kaf of the spoon, the head of the spoon that went into your soup. But if your spoon is metal, the Shulchan Aruch brings, mandamar, that hamiksaso hamkulo, the entire metal spoon gets hot. So potentially the blios of milk from that entire spoon could have gone into your chicken soup. So you need enough chicken soup in that pot. You need shishim, you need 60 times the entire spoon. Because it's metal, ham miksaso, ham kulo. So it's something to be aware of when we're stirring our chicken soup. Try to put the dairy spoons away, but if it does happen lamaisa, it does make a difference if it's a wooden spoon, a wooden ladle, or if it's something metal. So it's ham miksaso, ham kulo. Based on the physical properties of these material, there are halachic ramifications. Good, the 2 dots. Noisin Eskarev. They put the kishkas, they put the legs inside. Tanya Devei Rabbi Yishmael. There's a brisa from the Academy of Rabbi Yishmael. He says, Kuruhu tuch tuch, that he called the carbon pesach tuch tuch while it was cooking. Tuch tuch refers to the sound a kettle makes or a pot makes. We understand when it's boiling, the pressure, the bubbles kind of push the lid up. It goes tuch tuch tuch. We saw this in brachos. They said you should cook the beets until they say tuch tuch. So you put them in the pot, you boil them up, it says tuch tuch. So we see what was going on is Rabbi Yishmael was holding like Rabbi Yossi Galili, that you could put the kishkas and the legs inside of the animal, even though the outer part of the animal is kind of like a pot for the legs, and it's kind of it's kind of like cooking going on in the middle. So there's some gases escaping or pressure escaping, making these tuch tuch noises. We see that Rabbi Yishmael did like Rabbi Yossi Galili in the Mishnah and put the kishkas inside. Rabbi Meir Krehu Gedi Mikulos. Rabbi Meir called it Rabbi Tarfon. Sorry, this test. Rabbi Tarfon, our famous Kohen from the Seder, he called it a gedi mikulas. And yesterday we saw Rabbi Tarfon missed night seder because he was eating truma, a truma gedola. So he was that was his excuse for missing night seder because it was an avoda he was doing. He called it gedi mikulas. Now gedi mikulas means a helmeted gedi. They put a helmet on the gedi. What's the helmet? Is the kishkas. They put the kishkas on top of the head. They stuck them on the spit also. So you had the animal on the spit and then the kishkas on top, and it was like a helmet on top of the animal. So he held, not like Rabbi Yossi and Galileo, like Rabbi Akiva, that you need to put them on the outside on the spit. Taner Rabbanan, Eizehu Gedi Mikulas, the Asr Lechol B'Leilei Pesach. What is the Gedi Mikulas, the helmeted Gedi, that you can't eat on Pesach, Bizman Azeh, in our time? So apparently this Gemara is not referring to the time of Rabban Gamliel when they were still bringing a Korban Pesach, even after the Korban Abayis, but it's referring to a bit later in time when they made a Gezerah. We don't eat a roasted animal on Pesach, and it's still the minhag. There's discussions in the post game. Well, what if it's chicken? B'diavad, you don't have anything else. What if he roasted it first? Could you fix it by cooking it? You could roast it you understand if the lady of the house made roast because she forgot the halacha on Erev Pesach and there's nothing else to eat. What if you throw it into a pot of water and you boil it up after? So maybe that's an eitzah that the post can bring to save your Pesach dinner, save your Pesach seder. From going over the Gzeira D'Rabbanan of having roasted meat on Leil Seder. So this is Bizman Hazeh. Now we remember there was a fellow 3 weeks ago in Rome. Anyone remember the guy? We learned him 3 weeks ago in the Daf Yomi in Rome. There was Todos Ish Romi, who in Rome instituted a custom where they'd have an entire roasted animal on Leil Pesach, and the Chachamim didn't like it. The rabbi said, if you weren't Todos, we'd put you in Nidui. We'd give you an excommunication because you're karov to causing the Jews to eat kodshim b'chutz, because someone might make a mistake. And instead of saying zeicher the korban pesach, they might say zei korban pesach, and that would be kodshim b'chutz now. That would be a problem. If it's only a zeicher, it's okay, but because they're roasting it whole, they're making like a gedima kulas kind of problem with it, they didn't like what Todos did. And they said, if you weren't Todos, then we would excommunicate you. And there was a debate there. Well, why didn't they? Was because he was a strong man and he was had mafia connections, or was because he was a Talmid Chacham? And they concluded there, this was 3 weeks ago on Nun Gimel, he was a Talmid Chacham, and they didn't like it, but they let him get away with it. So what is this Gedima Kulas that we're not going to serve for Pesach Seder here in Chutz La'aretz? Kol shetzalo kulo ke'achad. It's when you roast the entire thing as one. But nechtach mimenu aver, if you cut off a limb, or nishlak mimenu aver, or you boiled from it a limb, ein ze gedim mekulas. It doesn't have the problem of being the whole animal that the Chazal told us not to cook like this for a Pesach Seder bizman hazeh. Hashta yesh lamar nechtach. So you're going to tell me cutting off a limb mimenu is good enough to make it not the gedim mekulas that we're having a problem with. Even though you cook it together. So it looks like what they did with the Korban Pesach is they cut off the legs and the kishkas, but they did roast them all together. So you're telling me that cutting off a leg, even though you're cooking it together, it's not so bad as a gedim mekulas. You know it's not a Korban Pesach. Amrat, you tell me that's not a gedim mekulas. Lo nishlak mibai. What about boiling it? So nishlak is boiling, shlika is boiled. So if you're boiling it, you're obviously not roasting it whole like a Korban Pesach. That he's roasting it when it's attached. He's boiling it attached. So if he boiled one limb of his roast while it's attached, then it doesn't have a problem with Gedima Kulas. And again, this is the eights of the post-game bring. If someone accidentally made roast, Erev Pesach for the Pesach Seder, is go ahead and throw it in a pot and boil it up real quick. You'll make shlika, and now it's not the problem of eating roast. We have the minhag, we have the gzeira not to eat roast on Leil Seder. Amarabba hamul yasa sharye. Stuffed meat is mutter. Now this isn't just chicken stuffed with stuffing. This is meat stuffed with meat. So we see this is not for the vegans. This is you took a chicken, you took out the kishkas, and you put in some beef, or you took your gedi and you stuffed in some chicken. So beautiful, and that meat was raw. Now he says, Rabbah says it's sharye, it's mutter. What could be the problem? Amar le Abaye hakabala dama, but it absorbed blood. So what's happening is the blood from the stuffing, the blood from the raw meat inside the outer animal, is coming out from the force of the fire, the force of the heat of roasting it, and it's going into the outer meat. And we're going to take a look at this taisvos, the big taisvos in the middle, hai mulyasa sharya. The stuffed meat stuffed with meat, an animal rather, stuffed with meat is mutter. Perish B'Kuntrus, the Rashi explains, Afal pi shalom malchu el tzli, even though you didn't salt the stuffing, the inner meat, only for tzli. So there's two different kinds of malicha. There's a malicha l'kedera, salting meat to put it into a pot. That's a whole process where you have to rinse the blood off of the meat. Then you salt it. The poskim say yafa yafa. We saw this in chulin. You salt it yafa yafa. That could mean both sides. It could mean a lot of salt. And then you wait for the salt to do its work of extracting the blood. And then you rinse off the salt, because now the salt contains blood, or bosai. It's usher, it contains blood. And now this meat is ready to go in a pot with other food. It's not going to leak out blood into the pot, because you've extracted all the blood that's relevant with the malicha process. Now, malicha letzli is a little different. It's actually less. It could be just a dash of salt. It's just sort of to help the blood start to come out, but we really rely on the tzli, on the fire, to really get the blood out. So if it's l'kedera, it needs a whole process of malicha with rinsing, salting, rinsing, with waiting in between to get the blood out. And if it's l'tzli, for barbecue, it needs very little preparation, just a dash of salt, nothing major. So the Rabbeinu Tam, back in the Taisos, the Rabbeinu Tam narrated tzli lo bai malicha kol. Rabbeinu Tam says tzli roasting really doesn't need malicha at all. The dash of salt, he would say, is just a zecher, the kol karban chatakiv milach, that all of our karbanos, all of our meat in the Beis HaMikdash needed salt. We saw even in Zvachim, even the firewood needed salt. We even put salt on the firewood. It was on the Mizbeach. So everything needed salt. Tolome bai kashe nitzla habasar yafe yafe. You don't need salt at all when you're roasting the meat well. V'niflat kol adam, because of the roasting, all of the blood's going to come out. Deshari, so that's mutter. Deyoter mi polit al yedei ha'esh, deyoter maflit al yedei ha'esh me al yedei ha'melach. Because the fire of roasting is even more effective at extracting blood than the process of salting. Demaisim b'chol yom, we see this every day. Demavashlim kaved, we do cook a liver, achar tzliaso, after we roast it. Afal pi shemachmirin levashlo acher melichaso. We don't lechatchila. We do not cook a liver after salting. Now, liver is interesting because a liver is basically blood. It's basically congealed blood. In the eyes of halacha, it's basically congealed blood. It's full of blood. Liver is very bloody meat. So if you simply salted the liver and then you wanted to put it in a pot with other food, we're concerned that there's still blood in the liver, because the liver has so much blood, and that blood's going to leak out. So the advice is to roast, to have roast liver, to have a roast liver or to have chopped liver, to roast your liver up before you cook it with other food in a pot. So that's what's going on here, is he says that even if you didn't roast it all the way, we rely on roasting because it's very effective to extract blood. We rely on it for the liver. Ela filo lo nitzla kol tzarko, even if it wasn't roasted entirely through, we rely on that to get the blood out of the liver. The lo niflat kol adam, not all the blood came out. Mutter, it's mutter to cook that liver with other things. Afogavta mrinim perkama decreasus. Now here we're going to find out the problem. Te'ika lav b'dam ha'evarim. There's a law of a lota say not to eat the dam ha'evarim, the blood in the limbs. So we know there's the lifeblood of the animal that has a iser karis. So we don't drink blood. Jews, Baruch Hashem, Jews don't drink blood. But there's also dam that's in the meat after you slaughter the animal, and the lifeblood goes out. But there's still blood in the blood vessels, in the meat, in the basar itself of the animal. So when is that asur? Hanibile davka k'shapirish, when it comes out of the meat. Kolzman shalo pirish v'lo yatzalachutz, as long as the blood hasn't come out of the piece of meat, shari, it is actually permitted. There's not an isser on blood that's inside the meat. So what's going on here is when you want to cook meat in a pot, you want to make a cholent, and there's a liquid medium, then if that meat is raw and it's not had salted, not been roasted, it's full of blood. And when you apply heat, that blood is going to come out into all your other food, and all your other food will have the isser of dam evarim, which is now perish. It's now separated out of that meat, and now you have a problem. But if you've roasted it first, you've extracted that blood. Roasting is even better than malicha. So that's dam evarim shapirish. That's why we do salting of the meat, and by the roasting of the meat, that's why it'll be effective. So that's the issue here. The rest of Tosfos is also good, but we're going to get back into the Gemara. So that's the issue here about the meat stuffed with meat. Hai miliyasa shari, but amar le'abaye hakabola dama. So that's the question: is the blood from the inner meat, which is raw meat, it's not been salted, it's not been roasted yet. You have raw meat inside of a raw animal. So the blood from that raw meat is going to come out of that raw meat and go inside of the outer animal, inside of your korban pesach. Amarle, Rabbah says back, Kibolo kach polto. This is a famous concept in kashrus. The way it comes in is the way it goes out. As it's absorbed, as it's bolea kach polto. That's how it can get out too. So his answer is, Yes, that's true. The blood will come out of the stuffing, the inner meat, and it will go into the animal around it, but then it's still roasting. It's still on the roast. That blood that's been absorbed in the outer meat is going to come out again al yedei the roasting. The fire will draw it out too. Just like the fire drew it out of the stuffing, it'll draw it out of the animal outside. Name a Messiah, let's say this is a support for him. No sin es kerav es b'nei me'av l'toicho. Our Mishnah, you can put the legs and the kishkas into the animal. My time, what's the reasoning? Because you would say, just like the blood is coming out of the kishkas and the legs into the carbon pesach body itself, it'll be drawn up by the fire again and drip into the fire. That's different. Turning over, made of dive, because the opening where you shechted the carbon pesach has an opening, so the blood from the innards can drip out into the fire. So name a Messiah, top of Amid Base. Halev, what about the heart? What do you do with the heart? Heart is also full of blood. Korehu motzias damo. You have to tear it open to draw the blood out, to squish the blood out of the heart before you cook it. Lo karachu, it also needs malicha. Lo karachu, you didn't tear it. Korehu la'achar bishulo. You could tear it even after you cooked it. Now that's interesting. If he bidiyeved cooked it without ripping the chambers open and there was blood in there, he could still tear it open after and squeeze out whatever blood is in there. Mutter. My time, isn't that because we say if the blood absorbed into the muscle itself of the meat from the chambers of the heart, that it would go out again? No, shiny lave de shia. The heart muscle is actually smoother. It has this pericardium, it has these membranes, so the muscle itself is sort of smoother. It doesn't absorb the blood as much as other cuts of meat do. Ravin Saba, Tofle. So they say, well, there's a kasha on this. Ravin Sava, the elder Ravin, Tafle Haki Bargozlo the Rav. He prepared a pigeon which had flour all over it for Rav. He made this for Rav. Amrele, Maile Tifle, and Rav told him if the tafel, the covering is also good, the flour that you cooked it in is also delicious. Havli ve'echel, I'll eat it. So Hachi Besmida, that was fine flour. The mafrir, that it becomes crumbly and it lets the blood escape. So what's going on is this was the invention of schnitzel. This was breaded chicken. They took a bird and they breaded it and they roasted it on the fire. So beautiful. They invented schnitzel. So he says there'd be a problem if the breading, the flour on the outside absorbed the blood, it would be usher to eat. And we see that what Rav said was if that outside is good, I'll eat that too. And it sounds like even though it absorbed blood, they said, no, it's fine flour and it lets the blood out. So it's also kibolo chachpolto, even if blood comes out of the bird during roasting and goes into the schnitzel part, into the breading, it's going to come out again, al yedei eish, and you could still eat it, even though the blood went through that the schnitzel covering. V'ha Rava ikla levei reish galusa. Rava visited the reish galusa, v'taflu le bar avza, and they also made a schnitzel for him of a goose. They made a goose schnitzel. I've never had goose schnitzel, but apparently that was a thing back then in Bavel. Amar loy dechazite de zig gezuga. He says, if I didn't see that the schnitzel part, the breading, was clear like glass, like zuza chivara, like white glass, I wouldn't have eaten the schnitzel part. So what he's saying is, he's saying the breading didn't turn red from the blood of the goose. In fact, it was clear, which shows that the blood must have gone through, and didn't get absorbed into the breading. If you tell me we rely on kibolo chachpolto, the way the blood went into the breading, it'll also go out. My orya kizig. So why did he need to see that it was clear? Afilu kilaizig nami. Even if he saw it was reddish on the schnitzel part, he should still have eaten it because we would rely on the fact that the blood escaped. Chasam bechivara de sharir. So this was white flour. That it's sure, it kind of clumps together, it gets really sticky on the bird, and it doesn't necessarily let all the blood out, it doesn't necessarily have the blood pass through it easily as the smida, as the fine flour did. Hilkasa, and the lemaisa here is dismida with using fine flour, bein osmik, bein la osmik, whether it turns sumak is red. Remember we have the famous line in Shas, in Sanhedrin, ma chazis didach samek tvei, how do you know your blood is any redder? You know, we have this by the mitzvah of if they're trying to convince you to, God forbid, murder someone else, they're trying to make a Jew murder another Jew, then the Jew asks the shaila, the nochri, the Ovid of Avodah is trying to make me murder another Jew, and he says, well, you're not allowed to do it, even if he's going to murder you, because why do you see that your blood is redder? That's lashon samik, is red. So even if this schnitzel, if the breading is red, if it's fine flour, that lets all the blood out because it gets crumbly, it lets the blood escape. So even if it's reddish, we let you eat it. Bein lo asmik sharia, that's mutter to eat that breading. De chivarta, if it's white, izig, white flour. Chivarta is white flour. Izig, gezuza, if it's white, gezuza chivar, like white glass, it's clear, doesn't have redness to it. Sharia, ilay aser, but if it's turned red, then we're concerned that blood has been trapped in the schnitzel and the breading part, then it's aser to eat that because it contains some blood. The shar kamachim, but other kinds of flour that are not the white flour, which apparently was thicker, and not the fine flour, osmik aser, if it's turned red, blood's come through, we're not sure it's come out, so it's aser. Lo osmik shari, if it hasn't turned red from the blood coming out of the chicken part, the schnitzel part, the bird, then it's mutter to eat the breading. So hai mulyasa, so this stuffed meat stuffed with meat, manda aser, the one who says it's aser to use mulyasa, and that was the machlokas we had at the bottom of Amud Aleph, afilu puma latachat, even if the mouth is to the bottom, so the mouth of the animal is to the bottom, or the base of shchita, we said in the case of the Korban Pesach, or the mouth is opened at the bottom, so there's an escape hatch for the blood to come out. He says that's still aser, because what's going on is the blood is going to come out of the stuffing, the raw meat stuffing, and it's get into the animal, and we're not sure that all that blood is going to come out of the open mouth in the bottom. Amon deshare afilu puma la'el, and the one who says it's mutter to stuff a raw animal with raw meat, even if the mouth is above and there's not really a good place for it to escape, we rely on the fact that the tzli eish, that the open fire, is going to draw out the blood from the inner raw meat to the outer animal, and then again from that animal into the fire. Kibolo kachpelto, hilkasa mulyasa shari, and the halacha is stuffing the animal with raw meat is mutter. We rely on kibolo kachpolto, and it's has broad application. Kibolo kachpolto, the way something went in is the way it went out. We do this for kashrus also. If a kli, a spoon again, gets trafed up, it was a milchik spoon, got dipped in the chicken soup. Well, it was in the liquid that was made it, we call it treif, but it's not treif, it's simply not kosher. So we just boil it in water, kibolo kachpolto. It was in hot liquid medium, we put it in a hot liquid medium, and the blios, the absorbed taste, they all come out. That's kibolo kachpolto. So then again, by a barbecue, it's a kosher barbecue, or something used on dry heat, it's a little harder, it needs libun, because again, kibolo kachpolto, it was with dry heat, it needs a dry heat to get hot enough to get the blios out. Good. Afilu pumala'el, so mulyasa sharia, afilu pumala'el. Even if the opening of the animal is above, is facing up, we allow it, kibolo kachpolto. So umtza, if you have a piece of umtza is raw meat, what's going on is this raw meat sitting a while, and whatever blood vessels in it starts leaking blood. So there's blood leaking out of this piece of meat, or beye, or testicles, or mizrake, or blood vessels. Pligi ba Rav Acha v'Ravina. So they have a machlokes if these things are mutter. B'kol Torah kula, Rav Acha lechumra, Ravina lekula. So usually Rav Acha is more machmir and Ravina is more mekel. Behilkaska Ravina, and we rely on Ravina lekula to be mekel. Lavar michani tlas. Aside from these three items, the Rav Acha lekula. Here Rav Acha is mekel, Ravina lechumra, Hilkaska Rav Acha lekula. And here we go lekula. Also, we let you eat these items that we will describe. Hai umsid da asmik. So this piece of meat that is getting bloody because blood is leaking out of the meat itself. It's dame varim, and now it's starting to perish. Chotche. So you cut it up and you salt it, afilu kadera shari, and you can even put it once you've done malicha. You rinse it and you do the malicha, even though it was leaking blood. It is shari, even though there might be more blood in there in those blood vessels. You do the malicha kedasa kedin, and you cook it in your cholent, and it's mutter. Shabte b'shipura, you can put it on a spit shari and roast it also, made of daiv, because the blood will drip out into the fire. Achte gumrei, but what if you put it on hot coals? So that's not quite the same as a tzli eish. Plige ba Rav Acha Ravina, chad aser v'chad shari. Manda, so one says it's mutter, one says it's aser. Manda aser, matzmit samit. He says that putting it on hot coals, it's not really, doesn't have the same power of roasting on a fire, so it's kind of just going to shrivel it up. It's not hot enough and fiery enough to draw the blood out, to be made of dye, to make it drip out, so it's going to shrivel it up, and some of the blood will be trapped inside. Mandashari mishav shaiv, and the one who says is mutter, no, the coals even will definitely have enough heat to draw out the blood. Hilkasa mishav shaiv, we rely on the fact that it will draw the blood out of the meat. The kanbeye, and so too with testicles of an animal, chatche and malche, they could cut them and salt them. Filu kadera, and even cook them in a pot with other food. Sharian, that's mutter. Talina bishipudu, or you can suspend them from a spit and roast them on the fire. Sharian, made of daiv, because we say that the blood will drip out of them. Achtinhu agum, right? If you place them on warm coals, plige bar ravina. Again, they have the same machlokes, chad asar, chad shari. Man de asar matzmit samad. He says they're going to shrivel up and not let all the blood escape. Man de shari mishav shayev. He says the coals are hot enough to draw the blood out. Ken mizrke. And so too, these mizrke are these sort of blood vessels. I think they're large blood vessels. They're edible somehow. They could cut them open and salt them, afila kadera, and even cook them in your cholent. Shari, that's allowed. Talya b'shipuda, or hang them from a spit and roast them on the fire. B'shipuda beis shchita l'tatai, with the opening down. So apparently these are large blood vessels, and they even have the base of shchita where they did the shchita on the animal. So as long as that's facing down, because there's a lot of blood there's even possibly dam nefesh there left over from the shchita. So as long as that's hanging down to let the blood out, shari made of dye, because the blood will drip out from the tzli eish. What if you put them on coals? He says the coals aren't hot enough to draw out the blood, but they'll shrivel it up and trap the blood. When allows it, says no, the fire will draw out the blood. Hilkasa mishav shaiv. We said we go to kula kula, so even on coals, that's good enough. It's similar enough to roasting. Hi umsa da asmik. So this piece of meat that's turned red. So what's going on is there's blood inside the meat, and you leave it sitting there on the counter. The blood will start to come to the surface. Cholye asir. It's chola is asir. Now chola here, Rashi says, could mean the gravy if he cooked it with something. That's the gravy that comes out, or it could mean the vinegar that they were noheg sometimes to put it in vinegar to stop the blood from coming out, and then be able to be mavashalit. So that the vinegar was kind of it caused a chemical reaction to sort of seal off the meat and trap the blood inside. So either the gravy is asr, can't drink it because it contains some blood, or the vinegar you use to sort of seal this meat off is also asr to drink the vinegar because it would contain some blood. Lo asmi chalye, if the vinegar did not get red, shari, it would be mutter because we see it doesn't contain blood. But Ravina Amar, afilu lo asmik nami, even if the vinegar you used or the gravy that you're seeing from cooking this meat was not reddish, it's also a problem. Afilu lo asmik nami chalye aser. This vinegar or this gravy is aser to drink. Ef shar delespe shuryaki doma. It has to have some blood in it, because what happened is you took this bloody meat and you cooked it. So now that blood had to go somewhere. Either it's in the gravy somewhere, or it's in this vinegar. If you go like Rashi's second shot, that this piece of meat with blood on it was dipped in vinegar, so that blood went somewhere. Even if you don't see it in the vinegar, it's still there, and you shouldn't be drinking that vinegar. Amar le mar bar amemar le Rav Ashi abba magma le gamuye. He would drink this vinegar, or this gravy, even though there was some possibility of blood in it. He would see wouldn't see anything red in it, and he would go ahead and drink it. He could say Amar Rav Ashi gufe magma le gamuye, or you could say Rav Ashi himself. He did like his father, and he drank it, which reminds us there was a famous Gemara about waiting between milk and meat. And he says, my father waited a whole day, but I only wait misuda l'suda. So we see that people often follow their fathers, and it's a big mussar to fathers, that when we're careful with something in halacha, we're careful, in this case with kashrus, they saw what their father did in kashrut, and they followed that. If we're careful in davening, we're careful in mitzvah, careful in tzedakah, our sons are watching us. Our sons see this. So it's a big mussar for fathers. Amar le mar bar meimar, finishing up, le Rav Ashi, Abba, hai chola de cholit be chadazimna. My father, when he used vinegar once to seal off the meat or to treat the meat. Tulo tanai cholit be. He wouldn't use it again. He wouldn't recycle the vinegar. Once it had been used, that chemical reaction took place, and he didn't think it was strong enough to use it a second time. Mashna mechala mitamha de chaltinan be. So what is that? How is that different than raw vinegar or vinegar from fruit, which is weaker? So there it has the acidity of the fruit. So vinegar is made of different things, but here if it's like apple cider vinegar or something, it has that acidity of the vinegar, of that kiyua is acidity, de peire, be'ene, it's still there. So it's still possible to treat fruit with it, even though it's fruit vinegar and it's weaker than wine vinegar, perhaps, but it has this acidity, so it's able to work on the meat. So no longer extile. Once you've used the vinegar once, even if it was a strong vinegar to begin with, once you've used it once, it's pasnished. You can't recycle it again to do the same chemical reaction. This word kiyua, real quick, 1 minute thing about kiyua, is we say our charosis should have kiyua in it. And there's a whole machlokes about the tapuchim, the apples that go in our charosis. We're going to see that. We're going to see the recipe. In Pesachim, it's going to have the recipe for charosis. It's going to say we use tapuchim, and the Mefarshim say that they're kua, that they are sharp, they're acidic. So there's some achronim later on that say that's not apples. Apples are sweet. So obviously, not obviously, because there's a whole discussion about this, about what to put in your charosis. So kua here, it's acidic, but we understand that some apples are a little more acidic than others. There's some green apples, crab apples, sorb apples. Certain apples have more acidity. So maybe there's an inyan in your charosis. We're going to get later in the Gemara. So the recipe, maybe there's an inyan of kua to make sure those apples are a little bit tart when we put them in our charosis. Shkoyach Rabosai.